All right, everybody. Welcome back to HR Heretics. Today we have Heather Doshay on the show. Heather, you are currently at SignalFire as the head of talent. Previously, you were the VP of people at Webflow. You've been at a number of places in your career. Where I actually want to start is you were at Hired, reporting up to somebody who we might know, who is Kelli on our show. And you were mentioning some pretty brutal management tactics and abusive practices that I would like you to alert our audience about.
I was not prepared for this.
Fun fact, I did not report up to Kelli. I was not so lucky.
That's right.
And so as much as I wish I could tell you tales of her management style, I only got to experience her as our wonderful head of people. So
you know what, Heather, I remember we interviewed Heather and we were chatting before, and I was so excited to join Hired. And I was like, this woman's a badass. Like, she was running the talent function and whatnot. And it was crazy in there. Remember how we were growing and all? And she's like, I want to be an L&D. I want to come over. I'm like, I would love you. I don't even know what I'm doing half the day. I can't do L&D right now. But Since then, I just said before we started, Nolan, she's crushing, and amazing career and amazing leader in person. So
yeah, so bummer. That didn't fit my narrative.
Yeah, clearly it was a total lie because the org chart didn't happen.
Once in a while. Okay, so I want to talk about SignalFire's State of Talent report. Can you tell us what that is and what you guys found in that report?
Yeah. So maybe a little bit about SignalFire to help you kind of contextualize this is that we're a venture capital firm, but we're built like a technology company to serve the needs of founders. And one of the unique things that we do is we have this value add called Beacon, which is an AI talent engine, essentially tracks 80 million companies, 600 million people. And so we use that to actually inform our investments, to help our companies and our portfolio find, companies for customers as well as talent. But you can also use that data to understand the market in a really global way, which is very fascinating to me personally. And so I set out with our head of research to kind of answer the questions that we know these things are sort of stewing around the world, but we don't always have the data behind them to confirm our suspicions. And so everyone's talking about AI. Everyone's talking about people leaving, San Francisco or going to certain places or going remote. Like, we wanted to just actually test these numbers. Behind the scenes, I asked 35 different data questions to our head of research. Can you help me figure out if any of these things are actually happening? And the most three interesting themes that came through were around the geo movement piece. Actually really interesting is the Gen Z versus Gen X workplace trends. And then, of course, AI and what's really happening under the surface with who's actually getting hired. Every job description says we need a PhD in computer science for some ML role, but that's not who's actually getting hired. And so really fascinating, kind of like pull back the curtain on some of the things that we might suspect.
Okay, so let's go in order. So talk to us about geo and specifically what you guys found.
Yeah, so it's complicated because there's a percent of growth versus a raw growth. So in terms of raw growth, basically the most common move you would see is someone leaving San Francisco or leaving Seattle in the last 4 years, like pandemic wide, and moving to New York City. That is like the raw growth, number one thing that's happening. That said, it's a little misleading because it doesn't mean that like New York took over as the tech hub. San Francisco by far and away still has the biggest concentration of tech talent. We're just seeing a lot of shift in that direction. And then the other thing that was really interesting to me was Texas. So I know Austin to be like a tech hub, but what I didn't realize that by percentage of growth over the course of its own population before the pandemic to now, it grew more than any other kind of tech hub or any other city really in the country. And Dallas, which I never think about as a tech hub, came in number 3. And so when you think about sort of like this idea of where you hire, where you launch a company today, and the idea of remote work and where you might be able to hire from, to know that these other places are really forming with a great concentration of top talent was super fascinating. And I know we're all in different locations.
I've anecdotally noticed that New York it feels like many of my friends have moved there. It feels like the younger generation is picking New York instead of San Francisco. And everybody in New York, it feels like, is actually working in person versus working hybrid or remote.
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting. There are new grads that we have invested in who are moving from like Michigan or other kind of university centers, and they're choosing New York as the place to launch their company. And I think a lot of it is like this feeling of the energy is what a lot of people describe, like this notion of it's back. Like New York kind of hit hardest of the pandemic earlier than everyone else. It recovered faster than everyone else. Everything just moves faster there. So when you're really thinking about like hustle and bustle and trying to create a company, a lot of founders are choosing to found their companies there. And then talent is going there because It just seems fun as an energy goes, and they still don't take a huge risk. It's not like they're leaping to some place that's not a known entity for great job market as well.
I feel like anecdotally, I feel like I just have more chats with people in New York now, right? Like just doing this for a period of years, and I'm like, oh, where are you been? New York, New York. It's happening more than I feel like it has in the past. I have a question. What about like any cities, Heather, that are retracting? Anything in the data you're seeing around surprises around cities that have less talent than before? Anything like that?
Phoenix was the only one that saw a loss, which I thought was really interesting because I used to think of Phoenix as like the sales hub, like where you would go put a sales team. And yeah, and I think Utah is actually gaining. It's not in our top 10, but when I think about now when people are talking about where to put people, no, I'm curious because you've got roots there. I hear that there's now more than one tech hub, and people are also thinking about wanting people to be in the same office as the rest of the team because there's that return to office movement. It's also affecting sales. So I think there could be a piece of that too, but that's just my speculation on the side. The data just showed 6% losses essentially in Phoenix. And then in Seattle was really interesting because there was flatline growth, 6% growth, but pretty flat for big tech, which is like Boeing, Amazon, a lot of big tech companies are there. But there was huge growth in Seattle. It was the number 2 by percentage for startup growth. So I think they are leaving one job and entering another. All of our data was tracking startup talent for the most part. And so when you think about that, it's not necessarily that the city size itself is growing, but it's where tech is merging forward. And especially in this world of return to office, that's sort of what you want to think about is like, where can you actually hire the best talent? Where are they concentrated today?
Yep. I can tell you that Utah's absolutely growing. Unfortunately for me, we moved in 2018, but it is a huge hub for sales talent because of actually the Mormon religion. Interestingly enough, part of the reason why is because when they go on their missions, they have to most of them are going to a brand new country, learning a brand new language, and they're going door to door selling the most difficult thing in the world, which is religion. I also have data on Arizona. I went to Gilbert High School, and my joke on that is those of us who grew up there spent our entire lives trying to leave. And now on Instagram, everyone's like, oh, Scottsdale, it's great. And we are now officially in the season in which my Instagram for my friends in Arizona, I don't see anything from them. And so I think part of the reason you're seeing people leaving Arizona is it turns out it's insanely hot from, call it April through October. But Instagram doesn't really do a good job of showing the downside of the trade-off of location.
I saw a video where someone was frying an egg on the floor in Arizona. So I am very aware of the heat and I really could never go. I mean, it sounds like lovely to have spa life and live in Scottsdale with a shopping center and just retire there. But then I think about the heat and I don't want those electricity bills for the air conditioning.
Yeah. So talk to us about the Gen Z findings that you also have.
Yeah, so these to me are the most fascinating. And it was interesting when we did this report, the media really picked up and honed in on the location movement. But to me, the Gen Z piece is massive because we're still learning. Gen Z is just 4 years out, maybe 5 years out at most right now of college. But if you look at the first 4 years of a Gen X grad, back then versus the first 4 years of a Gen Z grad today, the average Gen X grad 20 to 30 years ago was seeing about 1.1 jobs in their first 4 years out of school, meaning they took a job and they pretty much stayed there. That is doubled for Gen Z. So now Gen Z is on average 2.2 in their first 4 years. And so they're just changing jobs at a much more rapid pace. Gen Y, which, millennial known as, which I'm a part of, is right in the middle, like 1.8. And if you think about it, it's just trending in this direction of lack of maybe tenure and staying and kind of that being an important thing. But with Gen X, we'll say they have, no recessionary environment, no bad economy with the pandemic, any of those pieces. But Gen Y did, right? So it's just really fascinating to see.
I stayed for almost 5 years. Yeah, my first, I think I'm X, right? Is that right?
I left in 6 months.
I've strangely held every job I've ever had for between 2 to 3 years. I'm about to hit 3 years at SignalFire. I'm going to break a record for myself. I'm very excited, but it's that chronic kind of movement. And I don't know what you all think because we know the movement itself, but we don't know the intent behind the movement. So I've been asking coworkers who are Gen Z anecdotally, what do you think this is? And I don't know for sure, but I don't think they see the workplace as loyal to them the way I think a lot of us aligned our identities around a workplace. You ask me about myself, I'm going to tell you what I do and where I work in the first 10 seconds. They don't feel the same way for the most part. And so jobs are more transient, but that's the anecdotal what I'm saying. I'm curious what you all are seeing from that population.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think the loyalty factor is much different. And because of that, they'll jump, right? They got to raise here or raise there, and they'll jump very quickly. And I think maybe also the macro, like some folks have lost their jobs or are afraid of that. And so there's that element too, which I think is a bit different than at least what I experience.
Yeah. My take is there's not many companies actually investing in new grads. So it's one thing to hire a new grad. It's another thing to invest in them and to help them grow. One of the reasons I left, I had a great job, but my boss moved over to Google at the time. And so I followed him to Google. And at Google, it was just like, there's a bunch of people my age in my role, all getting like this immersive training. And it felt like a little bit like an extension of college for me. And I felt like, you know, I obviously wanted to make more money and all of those sorts of things, but I felt like they were doing their part to help me grow. And I feel like today there's this like, great, we hired you, now like go solve business problems. And the entirely like skip step of college didn't teach me shit. Like I didn't learn anything about how to be a business person in college. I learned that working. And we're skipping over that step for these people. And I feel like that's part of the reason why.
I couldn't agree with that more. I don't know if you probably haven't read my dissertation, but it was all focused on the impacts of college on people's careers. And I focused on women because women are less likely to negotiate, all these pieces. And I wanted to know, how much does college actually serve as a great equalizer? And the answer is not at all. All of the most impactful things from college are actually like internships, student activities, the things outside of the curriculum itself. And so when you think about this Gen Z population, they went to college during a pandemic. Like if they graduated in 2019, that's the earliest group, but the large share, the past share is going to have gone through high school, college, and the workforce in this post-pandemic world that's like figuring itself out. That's a really hard place to kind of miss out on maybe some of those kind of immersive social activities that can prepare you for the true hardships of a workplace, especially in a return to office environment. So it's going to be slower on the uptake for a lot of these things. They're probably going to require a lot more structure and support and investment. And I don't hear about like the rotational programs as much as I used to anymore, those investments where you could kind of try out different things. I think there's a little bit more like, what can we get for the money? At least not in startups, but in bigger, tech companies, like shareholder value is important and companies aren't doing it well. They've got to figure out where they can like be efficient as the code word. And a lot of times that means not investing in more junior talent.
What do you think about, like, back to your dissertation, Heather, and where that's going? Like, I'm hearing more and more college might not matter. Why should I attend, to the point of it's not helping or preparing? Let's just skip it and work. And I've known some people that have done that, been very successful. Do you think there's any legs to that, or, where that might go in the future?
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting. You see so many founders who are 18 years old right now. Granted, there are more founders who are older. We found that in our report as well than there had been historically. But there's a lot of kind of people skipping out on college to found companies or to just join companies. And so I think, again, the jury is still out. This generation is still very new. But when you think about attending a 4-year university and paying that tuition to attend classes online and maybe miss out on a lot of the experiential piece, I don't know that the ROI is totally there. I don't know what I would do. I think I'd probably still go to college because that's just I have 3 degrees. Like, that's just the kind of person I am.
You love learning.
I love learning. I'm a student and I think I love achieving, but I don't see a value prop in going to university that I once saw. And I think that goes into the other piece of the report that was really notable, is this notion of, you see on job descriptions so often, must have a bachelor's degree in X, Y, or Z or equivalent. And there's a lot of requirements for people to have this college education that feels like a necessary, almost evil that you have to pay for in order to get access to a certain kind of job or a certain category of job. And that to me is just really an outdated mindset, especially given what we know about how effective a college curriculum can be. And the irony in all of this is my master's degree is in higher education, like literally the focus, the study of universities. And most everything that we studied was about like access and equity issues, the inefficiencies of university and bureaucracy and all these things that happen. And so as much as I am a product of that kind of a background, I'm probably like one of the biggest skeptics about it after studying it more deeply.
Hey everyone, we'll be right back in a moment after a word from our sponsors. Hey everyone, we'll be right back in a moment after a word from our sponsors. Your workforce is both your organization's greatest strength and largest single cost. With Planful, it's easy to unlock the secrets of successful workforce planning so you and your HR team can make the right business decisions. Imagine using data-driven insights to develop accurate forecasts, close hiring gaps, and adjust talent acquisition plans collaboratively based on costs today and into the future. Planful lets you collaborate with colleagues in finance to understand the value your employees bring to the table. And the best part, you can get started with Planful in just weeks with minimal help from IT. Plus, with Planful, you get an endless runway. Planful grows with you, no matter how fast or large your team scales. Ready to transform your HR strategy? Join over 1,500 organizations worldwide who trust Planful as their go-to workforce planning software at planful.com/heretics.
Here's a crazy stat. Between hybrid and frontline employees, about 80% don't typically work in an office. So it's no surprise that digitally engaging employees is the number one concern for CEOs as companies go hybrid. But as hybrid is quickly becoming the norm, it's easy for workplaces to start feeling a little less human. Yet delighting a digital workforce is possible, and it can even be, dare we say, fun. That's where Workvivo, Zoom's employee experience platform, comes in. If you've ever recoiled at the thought of a static intranet that looks like something you built in 1995 using MS Paint, have no fear. Workvivo is a dynamic, intuitive, accessible, and mobile-first tool. People actually like using it, which is why companies like Ryanair, Dollar General, Virgin, and more have rolled it out to hundreds of thousands of employees. Workvivo's activity feeds, spaces, shoutouts, and live streams, among other features, help elevate the employee experience like never before. The result? Dramatically better retention, productivity, and most importantly, connectedness. A greater sense of the belonging we all crave at work, whether we sit at a desk or drive a truck. Make Workvivo the digital heart of your organization and achieve limitless human connection. Head to workvivo.com to book a demo and make sure you tell them that Nolan and Kelli from HR Heretics sent you. I mean, job description requirements aren't even real. Like they're really not even real. And there's data on this to where men are more likely to apply to a job in which they don't have all of the requirements, where women feel like they have to check every box. I just think requirements and job, I don't even know why they're in there. Like, I truly don't understand that anymore. At Carta, Henry hated this. And his take was like, we're just solving problems. Like, let's get rid of job descriptions. Let's do problem descriptions. We don't need requirements. Let's just talk about the problems that they're going to solve and then put that out into the world and like have people explain to us why they are most equipped to solve these problems. I honestly think job descriptions is one of those things. We just keep doing it the way that we've always done it because nobody's creative enough or nobody's even thinking about trying to do something new here.
Yeah, I'm so curious how you would solve it, actually.
I don't think you need requirements at all. I don't, because here, what is it? What do requirements help you with? They help you with filtering. Mm-hmm. And if we're being really honest, I think there's this misnomer that AI is taking over at the front end of the applicant tracking system. I haven't seen it. Like, I haven't seen, God's AI that comes in and says, like, this is the resume that the recruiting team should talk to. Maybe it exists. Like, please send me your I would love to look at it. I haven't seen it yet. And it's definitely not widely deployed, even if it exists.
Looked at a job description in a while. I'll be honest. I haven't, but I think that most of them do not have that required experience phrase anymore. If anything, they've moved it to nice to have or.
Oh, it's in there. It's definitely there's like a requirements section, and often Heather's right. Oftentimes they're including something around like a higher education degree. It's
usually the first line, which is the strangest one.
So weird.
Bachelor's.
What happens, I mean, we've all been in the head of talent seat, right? And I think what happens is company goes, okay, we need to hire like a software engineer or a marketing manager or whatever it is. Okay, tell us about the profile. And a recruiter's going through the motions of saying, okay, let's understand. And they start from the beginning, which is they should have come from this kind of background. And then they start to use kind of proxies. And college degree is one of those proxies. I think it's silly because, quite frankly, I was a creative writing major. I don't know if that has anything to do with what I do. I mean, I do technically post a lot on LinkedIn, so maybe there's that. But I did poetry TA. This is not relevant. But what is very relevant is the work that I did working with Kelli at Hire. That was like the best training ground I actually had for my VC job because it was looking at talent in this other model, like turning it on its head. And I think a lot of times, like there's this idea of you want somebody who's seen the movie before so that they can come in and do the job really effectively because they've learned from the mistakes and errors. So I'm not saying throw out all the requirements because otherwise you'd have 10,000 people who are really excited about the idea of the job you have that have no relevant contributions to make, or they're going to be making mistakes doing it for the first time versus somebody who could be very knowledgeable.
The other piece I want to just quickly hit on that you mentioned, which I find also hilarious, is this, I want somebody who's seen the movie before. And I think there's this company perspective that like, oh yeah, like Nolan led talent at DoorDash. And so like he should come lead talent here. And like, why would that be interesting to me? Like, why would I want to go do the exact same thing versus like taking on new responsibilities so I can learn and grow? And I think that I have a take that, you know, you need to be like giving people as they ascend in their career more scope, more responsibility, because otherwise they're going to stagnate and they're going to leave. And the person who wants to run the exact same playbook, my bias is probably not going to come in with like the most novel ideas to solve your problems.
So what about someone like me? All right, CPO for 14 years. Are you saying that I haven't come in with novel ideas for 14 years?
No, what are you doing right now?
Well, I mean, that's 14 years later. But you said the next job, you said one right after. And so I've done it maybe 4, 5, 6 times.
And maybe you took on, maybe there's like an extension of like some function that I didn't, you know, maybe you didn't have HR, or maybe you didn't have recruit. Maybe there's like a new thing that you get to take on.
Yeah, fair enough. I do think that, you know, difference in environment, difference in growth stage, difference in product or go to market.
Those are differences.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
And the last thing I'll say, the education thing, I think is going to be like, that's going to be very interesting to watch because I think we are early on and people kind of like sideways looking at these degrees, Heather and Nolan. And the irony is it's still in these job descriptions, bachelor's degree required, in a system that we just basically shit on early on and said that a lot of people aren't needed. So they're not reconciling, in my opinion, anymore. And it's going to be interesting.
We're in transition. And I actually think the transition is going to be pretty ugly for this current generation that is in school and like these kids that are in high school that are about to go to college, because college has never been more expensive and has never delivered less value. And so you're going to have these people who finish, who are like, hey, I did the things you told me to do. Where's my job? And the business world is going to be like, we don't give a shit about that, as you can hear in this podcast.
I do think that the people in college today, if they're sophomores now, are going to graduate in a healthier economy for the jobs market, and they might just get lucky. But yes, no, I don't think it's because of college. I think that's like a conflating. It's like an error. Jobs are always miscalibrated in the beginning. You make this job description, you say this is what you're going after, and then midway through you realize no candidate's passing X phase of our interview process. We probably have to go back to the drawing board and figure out what we really need, and then it's something else entirely. And so, I mean, all of these pieces are just maybe new ways of looking at a resume and trying to pull out the value of that person that they could bring to your company. And then just one more thing, because I'm on a rant, which is that, Nolan, I disagree with you about the doing the same job twice. I'm with Kelli on this one. What I think is that you do a job once and you're learning how to do it on the job in real time. And every day is the biggest day of your life. You're going to make errors if you're taking big risks. But imagine if you could take what you learned from that job, do it again in a similar environment and do it better. Gives you a lot more space and time and mental bandwidth to add on new things, try new experiments. Like you get incrementally better each time. And similarly, no companies are exactly the same. Point in time of growth stage, business model, whatever else, you're always going to be hiring for different kinds of things. And so they do get interesting. I think why I switched to VC though, is because I completely burned out on that model of doing it a little better each time. It was like frying my brain every single day, trying to react to pandemic mixed with HR leader, return to office mixed with HR leader, whatever else. There's always a new flavor being added. And the job scope itself of a CHRO is evolving. So essentially, you have no scope of role. There's no boundaries.
Yeah. On the CPO job expanding thing, So I just saw this the other day on LinkedIn, and I feel like I can't tell what HR leaders want. In one hand, they want like what you just said, which is like, oh my God, we're doing so much. And then on the other hand, they're like, I want a seat at the table. And for me, it's like, hold on, we're giving you more responsibility. Like, we're asking you to step up. I don't feel like we ever have this conversation about CFOs. And I feel like CFOs actually do the most in the company and get the least credit. And they're always the bad person because they hold the purse strings. And I just feel like there's this like a little bit of whininess around like, oh my God, my job's expanding. So please disagree with me on this, but like, I don't understand why there's so much of that in today's world.
You know what I think? And I'll just be very honest. I think that it's different, in my opinion, Nolan, because not everyone thinks they can do the CFO job. Not everyone has an opinion on how things should be. With our stuff, everyone has an opinion. Everyone knows how to do it. Everyone has a strong point of view on fill in the blank, RTO. It's a very difficult thing to navigate when you feel like Stretch Armstrong and you're pulled in 8 different directions and getting tomatoes thrown at you, and and then everyone's screaming and disagreeing. They look at you. What's the answer? That is very. I don't think CFOs experience that on literally a daily basis.
Yeah,
not one thing, like 12 things.
Yeah, Billy, the VP of Eng, has like, is showing up to every exec meeting criticizing you because he's got better ideas on how to run the people and culture strategy.
I've been a people manager, so I know how you should run the systems around people management.
That's well said.
I also think like CFO job is very hard. And I think both the CFO and CHRO are very important roles to be at the table because they're horizontal, right? There's verticals and you can own a certain part of the business, but these two have to think at the company level at all times. Like a lot of times you can't think about what's right for your function or your team. You have to think about what's right for the whole business. Whereas you see a little bit of the healthy push and pull between a sales and a marketing team. I think the difference with the finance role and the HR role is the amount of stuff that's confidential under the iceberg, where no news is kind of good news. And ultimately, what I'll say is I'll never have known how much Kelli actually had to navigate as a people leader at Hired as a part of this talent team, because so much of it's going to, like, I don't know if there were investigations. I don't know what else is taking up her time. There's a lot of really discretion oriented pieces where you can't talk. And so you're constantly walking on eggshells, trying to be like an actual contributor to the business strategy and think about how can people and business come together and be those side-by-side partners while also maintaining this level of dignity and discretion for the humans involved underneath, the pieces that that are also happening and dynamics at play. It is a tightrope walk versus CFO, super hard job, no doubt, especially in this world of strategic finance and having to figure out burn multiples and all these things. But the data is not quite so confidential. It's not people at stake. It's not dignity at stake. So ultimately, certainly all these jobs are hard. I don't envy anybody, but there's a nuance to a people leader and the information that you have to hold at one time and be so stealth and thoughtful in how you speak that no one else really has to do except for maybe the CEO or their chief of staff.
Yeah, you do have to wear a lot of hats.
That's a really good point, Heather. And the last thing I'll say on this is, again, to your point, Heather, all these roles are very hard. I do think the chief people officer role, the boundaries are a little bit more fuzzy. Like the role is a little bit more ambiguous in terms of what it could and could not do. And so it can be harder for those people to kind of say, oh, there's a line here, than it is for maybe a CFO or a CRO or something like that.
And what is the definition of success?
It's humans. It's messy. It's not.
But I think it's the definition of success is actually by CEO. They have different definitions. That's I think the hardest aspect of the job is that depending on which CEO you work with, they have like different things that they care about, and those things may match up with where your strengths are, where like the company currently is, or like, somewhere that is aspirational that the company is never going to get to.
The word I would use is subjectivity. There's a lot of subjectivity all around. The best thing you can do is try to take as much out of that.
Truth, and get clear on it before you start, which we've talked about. Okay. Shifting gears, Heather, you have a take on companies being remote ready. Can you explain what does that mean, and why do you feel like companies need to be remote ready?
It's a great question. So, well, first of all, if you look at my background, I've worked remote since 2018. So I know what it's like being in an office prior and the benefits and challenges of that. And then I know what it's like working from home 1 or 2 days a week, kind of being hybrid. That's how I kind of realized remote work was for me. And then I actually moved remote fully to Portland, Oregon, and have been remote working for San Francisco headquartered companies ever since. But I think what I've realized is that as a company on the organization side, the hardest thing you can do is build a hybrid organization. It is so much more challenging for the company. Maybe it's great for the worker. I'm sure it is. And for many people, they prefer it. But you have to build for two distinctive experiences, both an in-office experience and a remote experience. And you have to build for the two of them to converse with each other, because most companies don't have it where everybody just works from home on Fridays. It's different days of the week. People are coming in and coming out. So every meeting is managing these robust dynamics. And so I think when companies all were forced into going remote, I was already working for a remote first company, Workvivo, and we had been operating with 20% of the company in office in San Francisco, and 80% was remote around the world. This is how we operated from day one. So when the pandemic kicked off, we said, okay, we're just going to flip the other 20% to go remote too, right? And it's easy because we've operated this way from the beginning. And I remember Jack Altman called me and was like, we need to do a webinar for our customers about how they can navigate this transition to remote work. And can you come help us and do a tableside chat with me? I said, sure. So we do this chat and I'm giving all this advice about how to do remote work and whatever else, completely ignoring the nature of what we were about to experience in terms of mental health, physical health, all the pieces of a pandemic that kind of threw a wrench in every best laid plan about how to do remote work right. And everybody was in such survival mode that I think what ended up happening is nobody really got a chance to try out the best practices of remote work. They were just trying to keep the lights on and navigate these unsteady waters. I will say at Webflow, it was not hard running a remote first team in 2019. It was very, very hard in 2020. And so I can kind of disaggregate those two pieces. And so obviously now we're in this place where most companies are saying, let's just compromise on hybrid because employees like it, even though I really truly believe it's the worst of both worlds on the company's organizing side. But this is happening now partly because it's a really good hiring environment if you're hiring as a company. Very few companies are hiring extensively. And so there's a large pool of talent that's ready and waiting to join these companies and is willing to work in an office, is willing to do hybrid, and is locally there. I'm looking forward to 5 years from now where essentially the tables are going to turn back to how it felt maybe in 2021 when there was the Great Resignation and people are all looking for new jobs and whatever else. And it's hard to get talent. If you think about the movement of how AI is growing and you think about the macro economy, we're poised to have a cyclical change in 5 years and be back to a place where candidates have the power across the board. And when that happens, now companies are going to be going, shoot, I want to hire these people, but that person's in New York. Everyone moved to New York. What do I do with over there? And whatever else. And so you have a choice to either open more offices, which is really expensive, and still operate basically remote because people are talking across country to each other. Or you can be a little more flexible in how you hire and hire people remote and distributed. And I do think it will come back around again. This is my personal take. It's going to take some time, but it's going to work its way back up. And ultimately, whether you think you're just going to stay hybrid forever, or you think you might want to have the flexibility to expand your talent pool in 5 years when your business needs express that, it's going to be a lot harder to suddenly get good at remote work, to attract and retain these people. You have to start now, and you can start now, even if you've returned to office, because even if people are working from home 1 day a week or when they're sick or something else, they're still having that experience. So just setting yourself up for it today is like huge for tomorrow.
Hey everyone, we'll be right back in a moment after a word from our sponsors. Real talk, most talent leaders haven't yet cracked how to leverage AI for meaningful impact on their hiring processes and business goals. But the leaders who are effectively using AI to transform their recruiting team's efficiency and quality use Metaview. Metaview is the AI assistant for the interview process. Their AI records and transcribes hiring conversations, like intakes, interviews, and debriefs, then provides perfectly summarized notes of everything that was discussed. That means your people can focus on creating human connections with candidates during calls and save time on the busy work of cleaning up notes after every interview. But it's so much more than just a time saver, because perfect notes means perfect data. For every candidate in every pipeline, hiring teams can make confident, informed decisions, and talent leaders can finally take control of the interview process. Join forward-thinking talent leaders at high-performing organizations like Brex, HelloFresh, and Quora, and check out Metaview. Head over to metaview.ai/heretics
to talk to one of Metaview's product experts or get started for free. You'll be up, running, and AI-enabled in minutes.
This episode is brought to you by Warp. If you're a founder with employees in multiple states, you know managing state tax compliance is complicated. Warp not only automates state tax compliance, but also offers a user-friendly experience tailored to the needs of startups with a robust in-house team of experts. Warp ensures your startup remains compliant across all 50 states, giving you the peace of mind you need to focus on scaling your business. They also make it easy for startups to provide health benefits for employees, hire international contractors, and even claim R&D tax credits. Hundreds of startups trust Warp to handle their payroll and compliance needs. You can go from zero to payroll live in just 2 days. Don't let payroll and compliance hold your startup back. Visit joinwarp.com/peel or tap the link in the description. Get started and receive a $1,000 gift card when you run your very first payroll. That's joinwarp.com/peel.
Kelli, what do you think?
No, I listen. I think that the toothpaste is out of the tube a lot on a lot of this flexibility. I think the pandemic, people were doing it before, obviously, but the pandemic gave a lot more people a lot more license, like all at once, to move abroad, to do this, to travel. I mean, I plan on doing it at some point, right? Airbnb here, then go here. I mean, I think that toothpaste is out of the tube. I think that there is now a new expectation around flexibility. And I think that companies are going to have to work with that. And I don't know about you both, but even the past, few years, I've heard or have seen CEOs that have been very rigid. No, we're hiring hubs. We're doing that. And then they realize, oh shit, but there's like a gangbuster talent in Georgia and I'm going to make an exception. And everyone's watching that. And then the policy goes so I just think it's a little naive to think that, great talent, to your point. So at some point, we'll have the power and the choice. Good ones do now, and I think flexibility is something that's going to be table stakes.
Yeah, I think it's so. I'm not as bullish on you 5 years from now, and the reason why is because I do think AI is going to cost us jobs. I don't think it's going to add jobs, and I know that it's a contrarian take to what all the smart VCs are saying. So we'll see what happens, but one of the things that Kelli, you just said, which I totally agree with, is that somebody like you is always going to have opportunities agnostic of your location. But you have somebody that has a ton of agency because you have built up a ton of skill that any business would want. And this is the bifurcation that I don't think we're talking a whole lot about, is there is a very small subset of talent that has gained incredible expertise that any business is like, I will make that exception for that person. And then there's everybody else. And I worry about this everyone else thing, given the expectations that they think that they're in that really small sliver of talent and they're not. And those companies are just going to be like, I can find you close to where my office is because you're either going to move or I'm going to find somebody here that's actually going to come do this. That's what I think is more going to happen in the next 5 years. I think there will absolutely be exceptions. I think, the other thing is we're being disingenuous when we look at today and we say, oh, this company is in office or this company is remote or this company is hybrid. If you are successful, literally every single company has some either remote version or hybrid version because you just keep scaling. You keep adding people. Facebook isn't only in Menlo Park. Google's not only in Mountain View. And they have in-person requirements, but they're so successful that they have many offices. So I think it's a lot more nuanced, but I do think there is this agency piece that a lot of candidates believe that they have because in the pandemic, they were allowed to do it. That is now being ripped away from them. And we haven't fully realized that.
I think it's a good point, which, entitlement is a word that went into my head as you were describing that. And I think I like to think about how these words are going to be used. In 5 years, I hope to God we're not saying hybrid, remote, in office, rah, you know what I mean? One day, everyone's going to be all those things. It's just going to be how it is. And so I just hope we stop saying that one day because everyone's all those damn things. And I think it will be more nuanced, Nolan. It'll depend on the person, some blend of the person, the level, the function, and the job. versus what everyone's trying to do now, right, Heather, is like, pick a lane. Who are you? We're one of these things. And I just got hot on our segment that later today. It's usually never just one thing.
I think where people get it wrong is the focus is on the where we work, when in reality, it's like the how we work.
Love that.
And ultimately, when I say remote ready, it's less about whether people are remote working or not. It's the readiness to have a workforce that is decentralized, because that has already been the reality. Like you say, like a Facebook or Google for a long time, you might have a team that's in APAC while you're in EMEA and you're still conversing, in real time on these calls, even if but required to be in the office, which is the interesting part. And so it's similar to the job description. Like, we have these rules of the road that we've pushed for so long. And if you really step back, like, some of them don't make a ton of sense, but people like structure and order. So it's like an evolution over time for readiness to step away from the labels and move into the capabilities.
Yep. So Heather, you at SignalFire see a lot of early stage companies. Talk to us about some of the common patterns that you see as it relates to mistakes.
Yeah. So to give you some context, I work with companies that are 2 people and an idea, literally pre-product, all the way through to my focus caps out around like 500 employees. And then I've got some teammates who take the lead from there. And so you see these growth patterns happen. And I would say the bulk of who I work with are the seed companies. That's my focus and my passion, because it's so fun when there's nothing there and you get to create from greenfield in concert. And so these people don't have heads of people or talent. Again, they're usually a team of engineers, maybe one go-to-market person at a certain point in time. And so we co-create together and give them ideas about how to create the foundations for people and organizational success, so that as they grow, when they do hire a people or talent person, that person is successful. But that said, you do still inherit kind of organizational debt, because even a company that's 5 or 10 people has made choices about how they hire. Like, cap tables still look silly sometimes. And so I would say, like, the biggest mistake I've seen, and I think Tom, I listened to a previous podcast you had with Theory, Redpoint, Tom, which I was like clapping, like, I'm like louder for the people in the back the whole time I'm listening to him, because everything he said made sense to me. And he talked about the notion of over leveling. And I want to underscore that one to the end of time.
Really?
Oh, yes. Yes. Okay. So what happens is, companies equate, I can't compete with Cheers of Fang, now OpenAI's comp packages. So the way I'm going to win over top talent is to elevate their title to X. So everybody's ahead of something. Everybody's a C-level. There's no company who needs a C-level anything when they're a seed stage company. Like, they don't have the complexity. And the challenge that what happens is they give these titles away like candy. And then when they realize the person's really probably maybe at best a director or a lead, they can't hire over them. The title's given away. They can't hire under them, because nobody who's truly at that level wants to report to somebody that they think they should probably be managing, instead of the inverse, right? And so ultimately what happens is they fire people. And some of these people are good people. Essentially, people get terminated because they can't figure out how to top them. And so when people are super self-aware, sometimes you can work it out where someone changes roles within the organization and gets topped. But ultimately, the topping phenomenon is like a real problem. I think back to when we were at Webflow, I remember I got hired as the first executive. So the co-founders all had C-level titles. This is very normal. The title is really co-founder plus whatever functional expertise is the area. And I came in as VP of people, and I was an SVP. And I could have been like, well, I want to stay with this level or higher and take a bigger, title somewhere else. But ultimately, I had this great conversation with the former CHRO at Salesforce. And she said they did not unlock the C-level titles until they had basically gone public. CFO was the first one they unlocked to prep for that. Everyone was unique today. It's a lot of big titles, but the company size and scale matches. And so I think about this notion of, we never had a C-level outside of the founders at Webflow until I left. And ultimately, the company was multi-billion-dollar valuation, 400 plus people, the whole thing. And it wasn't necessary to attract great talent. You've got to attract on the opportunity and the job scope and the growth path and all of that. The other problem that happens, even if they stay and they're able to be that true C, comp data is so readily available today. Pave can be free to anybody, which is a great thing. Carta can be free to anybody, which is a great thing. I just saw they put out this, and you can send in your title and get comp data back. Those comp data bits are based on people who are experienced in seat. And so you could be going from being like a staff engineer to a CTO and ask for CTO level comp because your title is that. Shouldn't you be paid for that? And while that feels really fair in theory, what ends up happening is now you're overpaying essentially for the scope of role that you're not getting, and you're hiring around it to buffer it. So it's this slippery slope of things that happen. To the extent that people can keep titles relatively vague early days, anyone can call themselves a head of whatever they want to outside on the internet, but like keeping leveling like really manageable on the inside and thinking through upfront, like what is the scope of role and how can really attract people, I think is a huge thing.
Yeah. So the counter to that though is the Mark Andreessen like titles are cheap thing. And I agree with like C-level and VP, like for early stage, doesn't make any sense. But for me, head of does, because like it implies like, yeah, you run this thing today, but like we can hire above you. And like there will be some sort of conversation in the future as to if you are this person or if we are going to hire above you. So I think I'm aligned with you on C-level and VP, but like head of feels like a easy free thing to give out, and it does kick the can a little bit, and it feels like it's just a conversation. It doesn't have this like we can't hire above you phenomenon. Would you agree with that or disagree?
Yeah, I mean, I used to really detest the head of title because internally it can be confusing, because I think about it as this is like head of content strategy when you're the only content strategist versus like head of engineering when you manage a team of 40, and then you invite head of engineering to the leadership table, but you don't want to invite this IC to because it's too many people. And it just, you need to have clarity internally about what you mean when you think about these things. People need to have clear expectations around what they're joining. It feels like a bait and switch if that conversation's not held up front for a candidate. And then suddenly they're like, wait, I thought I was joining this company with my path to being the C-suite, and now you're telling me it was just a free title to give away to attract me. There's the short-term wins you can think about that get the candidate over the line, but what's the long-term retention path for that person? How are you going to invest in them to help them grow? I do use the head of title quite frequently in recommendations for companies, usually as a proxy for like director, senior director, as a leveling when you need maybe a first hire of a function who's experienced enough to do it all hands-on, but then can grow out a team under them. And then by the time they do, you decide, do you slot in as senior director or do you slot in as something higher? And that does work. But I think it's important to be transparent with the person of, we don't have leveling yet. By the time, a year from now, whatever it is that we get to that, let's have a conversation about where you're really performing. And I'll be transparent with you, you be transparent with me. And I think the key is like being on the same side of the table as your employees versus using sneaky ways to win someone over when you can't afford to pay, and making it like a long-term sustainable strategy.
You know, I just have to be honest. What I think about when I see the head of title, like the first thing that goes through my head, no pun, is what's the story here? Like what's the deal? Because something is not clean, clear. This person clearly wants to be a VP. They're not ready. Do they have, a bee in their bonnet? Are they overconfident? Are they hard to work? What's going on? Like that's the first thing I think of when I see the head of title.
Yep. And now the counter to that, so like I would frame that as like you're curious and you want what the story is. The counter to that is like we don't give out titles, and so you're manager of X. And now when I'm screening resumes, you don't even get past my screen if I'm the recruiter, because I'm looking for somebody that has director experience.
That's a great point. I will tell you, in my 25 years in doing this, I personally have not come across the use of a head of title because a company doesn't give out titles.
Yeah, I think it's a story thing. And if I put myself in the candidate's shoes, when it has come up, it's really interesting because this has come up probably 15 or 20 times in the early days of DoorDash and Carta. And when people explained it to me, I actually had a lot more empathy and that's why I've changed my mind on this. I also I was like head of before I got promoted to senior director at DoorDash, and I still kept like the head of title on the outside. But when people explained it to me of like, hey, I need to be like, in case I leave, I want to be able to say like my title reflected my scope and my ownership level. And I think that that's kind of fair because, there's the companies like Ramp, for example, who it's just like operations. And if I didn't know that about Ramp and I was going through resume screening, I might skip over somebody who could be, potentially incredible for the level of scope that we were thinking about.
I think it's a fair point. I just look on this show, we want to make sure that everything that's out there, people are aware of, and that's out there.
Yep. All right, Heather, so you also have a take on Pedigree. So tell us what that is.
Well, that just goes right back to the idea around like requiring college degrees. I can't tell you how many people want someone specifically from either McKinsey or BCG or whatever for this kind of role, or must have studied at Harvard or Columbia or Yale or whatever else. They need to have this set of things, and they look for those things as proxy for maybe intelligence or ability or whatever else. And certainly there's some, benefit to maybe having gone through the school that is McKinsey. You learn a set of things, right? And you're able to kind of present in a certain way potentially. But that is a really limiting view of who maybe has potential to be really effective at your company. And I'm just, the notion, and when people even talk about pedigree, it's like a word that you used for like animals. And it just like kind of hurts my soul a little bit when I think about it. Like whenever I say it in this cringy way, like when someone says like synergy, there's certain words that just make me kind of eek, and pedigree is like top of the list for me.
It's literally a dog food brand, isn't it?
Literally a dog food brand, yes. And not even the best one. But I think ultimately this notion of I want almost like a shortcut. So I'm a big fan of Daniel Kahneman, may he rest in peace, Thinking Fast and Slow, all these bits. The human brain is just processing so much information. And ultimately, you have to take mental shortcuts in order to get by. And so people will see Harvard go, oh, mental shortcut, smart person. And they probably are. They probably are, right? There's a spectrum, though, of intelligence. There's different types of intelligence. And if you only ever consider people from Harvard, you are missing out on the large majority of the population who is intelligent. And so it's basically like using an umbrella term to think through who you're willing to give a chance to, when ultimately by doing so, you could be missing out on the top talent that, by the way, also not everyone else is going after at the same time. And so companies could get very smart to think about other versions, other kind of categories or ways to assess the competencies that they're looking for in a job through interviews or through other factors. And ultimately, I think like one proxy that I really like is like somebody who saw through a company from like one stage to another stage, and they show some progression within role. And especially the like less sexy company brands, like if you're in recruiting, for example, and cool, yeah, you worked at Airbnb or Google, and that makes you super great at recruiting, but also you had a whole brand behind you that everybody wanted to work with. You work for the hard to whatever fine company that you've never heard of that has a really weird product category that's like maybe important, but not exciting to the common population. And you were able to grow that company from 50 to 200 in a year with talent that looks really strong, that ultimately the company had a great outcome. You are probably 10x the recruiter of the person who worked at the other place. And I'm not like, bad wording on the people who do come from those companies, because there's great talent who come from all of them. It's just a really exclusive way to view the world.
Yeah. And it's, the thing I think about is adversity. And, there's the old saying, adversity builds character. And I actually have the reverse bias on pedigree, which is like immediately when I see Harvard or Stanford, my wife went to Stanford, so I'm allowed to say this. It's like, what did you have to go through? Like, where was your hard path? Because like building a company is the hardest path that we're going to choose together. And if you haven't gone through it yet, I don't want to go through it with you for the first time.
Yeah. I mean, I think adversity is relative, and it shows up like it's kind of like my closet. I will fill whatever space you give me. And so ultimately, my version of adversity may not be as bad as yours, but there's no adversity Olympics in my mind. Everyone has their variations of things that they're going to go through, and it's valid for them. But I do think you can objectively look at the things somebody did in the context of what you need them for in a job and see opportunity outside of the bounds of what you really think about. And this is again where I'm so hopeful of the future of AI and technology is, can we train these models to understand the parallels in some of these pieces, to see things beyond who is top talent that is served up to you in the future could look very different if they can start to ingest these other signals that exist. So I'm pretty hopeful about it. And by the way, Nolan, I totally disagree that AI will replace jobs, because think about the 80s. And I don't think you and I were yet in the workforce in the 80s, but my dad was. And I remember going with him to work on Take Your Daughter to Work Day. He's a lawyer. There was no computer on his desk in the 80s. There was like a fax machine, a typewriter. It was like not a common thing in like the early 80s to have that, right? And ultimately, there weren't less lawyers once computers came out. They just got faster at what they did, and there were more applications and use cases for legal teams. And so like,
I hope you're right. I really hope you're right. I've just seen some of this powerful technology come out, and I've seen the way founders are talking about it. And the way that founders are talking about it is, I want less people. And that's the thing that scares me.
I watch a lot of these like historical fiction shows, and you'll see in all of them, there's like a whole bunch of dishwashers. That's a profession that you'd see in like all of these shows. and like servants, like house servants, and it's the wealthy people being served by these other people. You don't see nearly as many dishwashers today as you used to see because the invention of the dishwasher came out, and it did replace those jobs. But it freed up those people to do other kinds of work. Like the unemployment rate doesn't suddenly go up sky high because technology changes how people work. It just changes like what they might do and spend their time on. And I actually think that AI is going to be much the same. I don't think we'll see a lot of data, like entry type roles going in the future because those aren't really going to be as needed. But those people who have computer skills might grow into other things. And how could they start to do more like data analyst jobs or writing or something else entirely? So
that is the optimistic view of which like I am hoping you are right. I really am. So with that, Heather, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, my friend.
HR Heretics is a podcast from Turpentine, the network behind Econ 102, Moment of Zen, and Turpentine VC. Subscribe, 5 stars, share it on Apple, YouTube, Spotify, anywhere you get your podcasts, all the things.